Hello, and welcome to this Brand Square webinar featuring Brandimage's Chief Creative Officer, Don Childs, as he presents A Taste of Bourbon Branding, telling authentic stories with design. My name is Stephanie Krieger, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we get started, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is interactive, so I encourage you to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will be monitoring the questions and will address them at the end of the presentation. We will also record this webinar for future viewing and will send out a link to the recording in the coming weeks. Please also join in on the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag BrandSquare. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Don.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. And I wish that I could say that this is but it is a very appropriate location for what we're talking about today. So just a little bit of background. The reason that I'm doing this, while I do believe in like a fully immersive experience when I present, I just happen to be here. I'm here with clients on a retreat, and we actually do happen to be in the middle of Kentucky. So it's a fitting place to have this conversation about design anthropology along the Bourbon Trail. So one of the things that I think many of the marketers who are listening in see as the brass ring or the holy grail is how do you connect with millennials? So one of the things, and you probably also know this, one of the things that millennials are constantly struggling to find is a connection to brands and understand the heritage behind the brands, but real connections, things that are meaningful. And what they're looking for is authenticity. So what we're going to do today is talk about how design codes can communicate and unlock authenticity. And we're going to take a bit of a trip down the Bourbon Trail. I'm going to share with you some of the design codes we found, the process of decoding, and the process of recoding. So there's a storm about to come through. Hopefully we'll get through this before the skies turn ugly and the rain starts to fall, but it should enhance the experience. So here's just a little bit of an idea of where we're going in this presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about the trail that we took, and we're going to talk a little bit about our target consumer, a little bit about the process that we use to help define and articulate the target consumer, who we titled the aspiring expert. We use a lot of archetypes in the development of brands and in the revitalization of brands. We find that it's a wonderful shortcut to help us define values and behaviors and attributes around brand and its personality. And out of this comes what we refer to as a meaning framework. I'm not going to be getting into the depths of the process on how a meaning framework is created and what that looks like, but you are going to see the outcome of that. And then really the heart and soul of this presentation is about design anthropology and the idea that we are decoding meaning, looking for the meaning, decoding it, and then we're going to recode it as our process brings those codes to life through design. So as we go down the Bourbon Trail and we visit distilleries and we take in the experience, we're looking for places that not just inspire us, but things that connect on a deep and meaningful level. So here's a little bit of background that I think will help frame up this conversation. So the objective here was for us to create a super premium bourbon for Brown-Forman. So you see here the idea of the volume that they're hoping to capture, and this is over the lifespan of the brand. So this is not an in-and-out brand. This is the development of a new brand, the first new brand from Brown-Forman in decades. So it's a pretty significant assignment and opportunity for Brown-Forman. So the solution that we used is meaning-based. And I'm going to be using that phrase, meaning and meaning-based and meaningful stories, quite a bit. And perhaps some of the questions that come in may be about meaning and what I mean by meaning. But really the idea here is to understand at a visceral level how to communicate ideas and then ladder that up to an execution. So one of the things that you see here on this page on the right hand side, these are images that are actually in the Brown-Forman Cooperage. Now it's important, and you notice the caption there, Brown-Forman is the only major distiller that makes their own barrels and owns their own cooperage. And it opened in 1945. It is in Louisville, Kentucky, not too far from where I am right now. And these are images from the lobby of the cooperage. And as we go through this process of decoding semiotics for this new brand, you're going to see the remarkable similarities between where they are today and where they've been in the past. And this is some of the starting points of that authenticity. So keep in mind these images and remember that these are from the 1950s. They're not from 2016. So our target consumer is the aspiring expert. So I'm assuming some of you are bourbon drinkers. I'm a bourbon drinker. A lot of my friends are bourbon drinkers. And one of the things that's true about bourbon drinkers is that they want to have knowledge. They're thirsty for knowledge. They're thirsty for experiences. And one of the reasons that they love the knowledge and the experiences that they love to share that with others. It's conversational currency. And so there's this idea behind the aspiring expert that he wants to always know more. No matter how smart he is and how much he knows, he always strives to learn more. So what we did with the brand archetype, and I won't do a primer on brand archetypes here because any of you that know me will know that will take another hour just to do that. We worked with the creator/sage archetype. And the way we work with archetypes, we have a lead archetype and then a support archetype that helps bring depth to the personality and makes it a more meaningful and focused expression of the brand. So the key attributes for this brand archetype that we wanted to leverage and illustrate is that this brand was going to be full of wisdom and generosity and honesty, pragmatism, humbleness. The foils, which means the things that we have to stay away from and what it fights against as a brand. It's kind of its call to action is it's against automation, it's against dishonesty, sloppiness, pretension, complexity, ambivalence, and irreverence. So we went through a lengthy and thorough process of developing positioning. And I'm not going to be presenting that because I want to get to the idea of the design codes and get to that pretty quickly. But we always think about the why, the who, and the how around brands. And when we're thinking about the Cooper's way, we're thinking about this insight of the aspiring bourbon expert. I won't read these slides for you. You can read them. There's the Cooper spirit. It is that it takes a village. And there's also the idea of the cooperage, that better barrels make better bourbon. Now, it's critical to understand that in bourbon making, there are a lot of rules that make it a bourbon. And one of those things is that it has to be a new white American oak barrel. And the way the bourbon gets its flavor is that through the seasons, the mash, the clear distillate that goes into the barrel goes out into the wood, and then it comes back in. Then it goes back out, it comes back in. So the quality of the barrel is where the flavor and the character of the bourbon comes from. And so here we have our positioning statement and our brand pyramid, and you can read this quickly, but I think you're getting the gist of it. The essence that we developed for for the brand is raising true character, working from the idea of raising the barrel and also the idea that true character comes from the barrel. And you see some of these images here. These are current day images from the cooperage. All right, so I'll go through this pretty quickly also because I think we're about 10, 15 minutes into it. So when we think about meaning, we think in terms of an iceberg. And the reason that we do this is we start with the deep emotional connection, the non-conscious perceptions of what you feel. So this is the idea that you start with the thought of what it is you want to convey. And everyone talks about, you know, we need an emotional connection. And rational is important, and, you know, but we want to ladder up to the emotion. And our premise is that you start with the emotion. You say, well, we want to understand what we want people to feel. We then look at the subconscious perceptions, and that's how you feel it. And this is a manifestation that's just under the surface, just below the conscious. And then there's the rational. There's the why you should feel it. Now, too often marketers start with the rational. It's like, okay, I need my reasons to believe, and you've got to figure all of this out, and eventually we'll get to the emotion. And our premise is, no, you have to start the other way around. And design codes and semiotics play into that. So the idea of decoding meaning in images and in codes is key to this. So this example we have here on the lower right, these things combine together of the toothy paper and the letterpress printing, that really rich red and the elegant letter form. Those are codes that are cues and evidence of it being an invitation to quality and elegance. So we start with that idea of invitation to quality and elegance, and then we layer in these design codes to convey that meaning. All right, so let's get into the fun part of this. So here we are, and I'm sitting here actually not too far from some of these circles on the map. And what we did was we went with the client on essentially an audit of these distilleries to see what we could find in the way of meaningful codes. And so I'm just going to go through some of these images very quickly, and you'll see that it really is observational anthropology as we're looking for codes and cues and ideas that convey things on a deep emotional level. So here from Labro and Graham, which is where Woodford is made, there's the fieldstone and the nature of that fieldstone. There's the denim, there's the weathered brick, there's the rails on the ground that the barrels are rolled down, and the idea that it's rusted and it's not quite perfect and it's kind of meandering. The idea of the wood and the fixturing and the pieces and the parts that make up the experience in the story. Here's the stills, the copper stills at Woodford, and the idea of this polished copper, and also the idea of the rusted and not rusted, but the aged and distressed copper as well. Here are design codes on a barrel. So at this point, we're observing and we're cataloging, and we're looking at these things. And there's the color. You know, there's so many things that go into looking for design codes. Again, the wood, the stone, the rust on the hoops, the color of the product itself, that golden richness that feels almost like flame. Here's Willet. And you can see some of the same ideas starting to come to the fore with the design codes. And that distressed copper on the right is just so gorgeous. And even taken out of context, you would look at that and you would get the sense that that's authentic, that's real, that's not made up. And this is from the Willet Distillery also. The galvanized with the rivet on it, the stenciling. That 74 means 1974. It was so fascinating to go through this exercise and look for all of the hidden meaning that's right before your eyes. So here we're looking at some of the stencils that are used on barrels, and we see the tool in the foreground is used to tighten hoops. They pound down on the hoops to make sure that they have a firm connection to the barrel. The rick house, and at Willett they happen to be mostly white. And I could get into a whole another half an hour conversation about the rick house and the aging and what happens inside there and how they pick barrels from inside there and mix them together to assure that the flavor is just right. But I will tell you it has to do with the differences in temperatures from top to bottom. And the higher up it is, the warmer it is. So the bourbon goes further out into the barrel and comes further back in. So more of the flavor, more of the character of the wood is brought back into the bourbon. I think I'm just going to go through some of these pretty quickly. And they ought to be fairly self-explanatory at this point. You start to understand what we're looking for when we're looking for design codes. And after we have cataloged these design codes, we go through a process of assigning meaning to them. So you might look at this and on a non-conscious level. So you stop and you think about it for just a second, and you look at that C, and you say, all right, well, somebody painted that. That's evidence that a human has been there. That is a sign of authenticity, just as the stencil on the right is. That's two completely different ways of doing it. Handwritten. Here's Maker's Mark. And really, if anyone has an opportunity to go on the bourbon trail, even if you're not a bourbon drinker, I highly recommend it. It is such a great experience, and this part of the country is absolutely gorgeous. I'm originally from Chicago, and I tell people that I love living not too far from here because I get to experience this on a regular basis. The idea of the stamp, the patina on this, the stenciling and the nature of the stenciling, and Maker's Mark with the red wax, and Jim Beam, and there's the bung or the stopper, and someone has written with a Sharpie, and there's that you can see the seepage of the bourbon into the oak there. Also from Jim Beam. This is Knob Creek. So next we have Buffalo Trace, which is one of my other favorites because they make and bottle my favorite bourbon, which is, apart from Cooper's Craft, of course, which is Blanton's. So some of the things that we found here, some of this is that we're confirming some of the codes that we're finding. And codes could be obvious, like the stencil. They could be obscure, like the rusted bolt in the lower left of this image. The idea that this is layered, you look at this and you say, this has been painted and repainted and painted and repainted how many times in the lifetime of this rick house? And it's that idea of the layering of time that is conveyed through these design codes. There's dates, there's numbers, and you can just tell by looking at this. Again, when you take it above the waterline to the rational and you think about it, it's like, okay, I understand what this means, but at a non-conscious level, you feel the sense of authenticity. And here they are bottling Blanton's at Buffalo Trace. And these are wonderful salt-of-the-earth people who do all of this by hand, all of it. Right down to they have a pilot pen that they write on the labels. And now the cooperage. So Brown-Forman, as I said, this is 402 is the address, established in 1945. And what we're going to be doing here is going through the process as the wood staves come into the distillery, or not the distillery, sorry, the cooperage, and goes through this process and ends up as a barrel that then is sent out to the distillery. So we're looking at things like the craftsmanship. There is no glue in a barrel. It's all craftsmanship, and it's all so finely engineered to fit tight that it doesn't need the glue. So it's a very pure, authentic process. So things like these wooden dowels and the cross sections of the wood and how they fit into their mate. This is a barrel head before it's turned on a lathe and turned into a circle. Here's the tool. I found it fascinating and hard to believe that they actually used a hatchet. And you can see how well worn that is. The idea of the years of use and the care that craftsman has taken in taking care of his tool. Putting it all together. So you can see how it's like a puzzle piece. And the pattern is what we're taking note of here. The idea that when these staves are first put into their hoop, they're splayed like this. There's on average 33 staves in a barrel. And these artisans, this man seemingly randomly takes these staves and throws them in here. And he can just tell from years of experience what size and where they go. And you can see there's everything from the wide ones to the very narrow. He just knows by feel which one to grab from that stack in the foreground. The steel. This is beautiful new rolls of steel that is turned into hoops, that on the left. And there's this paradox of this beautiful shine and shimmer of this new steel against the wood. On the right, we have tags that were inspection tags that we found in the distillery. And so codes here are, well, what does it say? What is written? There's the color. What's some of the semiotic meaning in there? These are end cuts from the stamp of making the hoop. And you can see one of the hoops laying at the very top of that image. So you can see now we're looking for all kinds of clues to real authenticity that are linked to the place. Another key point here is you see those two bees? Those bees on that rivet mean it's Brown-Forman. And if you have a chance to see a barrel that's used perhaps, most of them are going to say K and Y, because those come from Kentucky State. And all of Brown-Forman's competitors get their barrels from Kentucky State. So this is a critical key that says this is uniquely Brown-Forman. The process of charring the barrel as it goes through the furnaces, that's a design code. The char itself is a semiotic code. The equipment of the craftsman all include codes. So we're cataloging all of these things so that we can assign meaning to them and apply them to the strategy. So the whole point of this is to be a bridge between the strategy that we've created and the consumer. And we're doing that through a design language that's built around semiotics and codes. It's really remarkable. I wish that you could go on a tour of a cooperage because it is fascinating and remarkable, and the craftsmanship that goes into these is absolutely amazing. That gentleman on the right is a third generation cooper. The care, the patina, the years of use, but also the years of care. So we just have a few more minutes left. So I want to make sure that you see how all of this is manifested, why it matters. So this is a process that we refer to as a meaningscape. It's a 2x2 where we start to map the design codes in a meaningful way, and we cluster them in meaningful stories. And I'll just reveal these one at a time. Hopefully the connection is keeping up with me as I speak. In our upper left, where this is the intersection of the inherent spirit of the Cooper. And again, you see at the middle, there's our essence, raising bourbon with true character, the Cooper's way. That is the intersection of the inherent spirit of the Cooper. So it feels carefully raised, and of the in the know, the intrinsic. So that's the artistry of making. And you can see some of these design codes, some of which are coming from our trip on the Bourbon Trail. Others are sourced from other places. Here you see design codes, many of which come from the Cooperage. And so this is, as you can see, much more about the Coopers and much more about the Cooperage itself. There's the nature of the materials. So this is the combination of overt craft in the know. So it looks carefully raised. And you also see that this is where the codes around the steel and the wood and the char and the fire all come to life. And then there's the soul of the vessel, taking the spirit of the design codes that we saw, and you see that idea of the splayed staves before it becomes a final barrel, and the intersection of the wood, and how all of those pieces and parts come together and meld into the barrel. And it is all about the soul of the barrel. And here is our initial, and I'm not going to leave this on the screen very long because I want to get to the final designs here. This is our design exploration, and this is how the design codes start to come to life through design. Now, in this case, we worked with many work-in-progress meetings with the client, very collaborative. We did a lot of workshops with the client. And so we brought the design codes to life through the graphics, but also through the structure. So structural design, the bottle design, combinations of proprietary and unique bottles that we designed, and also modifying stock bottles were considered. And you can see here how this is a very broad exploration, but it's also very focused. Each of those four quadrants has a very focused story based on those design codes. And next you see how these all came to life in prototypes. So these are 3D rendering prototypes. We didn't actually build the bottles in this case, but you see how those codes that are coming to life. For instance, in the upper right, the second in from the right, you see the labels that we saw in the Cooperage. You see on the closures on a couple of these bottles that it looks like that splayed barrel. You see the shape of the barrel subtly reinforced through label on the left, for instance. There's the new steel of the hoop with the rivets, and the idea of that beautiful silver patina of the new material, not necessarily the old weathered rusted that you typically think of, because this is the barrel that's new and right out of the Cooperage. So these were the two designs, and again, I hope that my connection out here in the woods of Kentucky is keeping up. These are the two directions that we brought together into the final design. And here we have it. So you can see how the design codes started to come together and are manifested into, apologize for the truck driving by, are manifested into the final brand design. So the worn patina finish, that conveys durability, longevity, and the hardworking spirit of craftsmanship. The embossed glass, and this storyline we developed ourselves also. So this is a verbal component that comes out of the visual component. What matters most we do ourselves. And so there's this idea of the brotherhood of the Cooper, and the embossed glass reflects the pride and quality of a bygone era. The white oak and the steel of the genuine materials, the workman's denim that we saw, and of course the batch documentation. So all of these codes are recoded and brought together in a unique and memorable and meaningful way to create a story that is authentic, it's unique to Cooper's craft, and also is a wonderful springboard for other touch points, for all of the advertising. We actually also did a brand tonality video that I can't share on a WebEx, a webinar, unfortunately. But all of those codes were brought to life with voiceover and music, and we shot footage in the Cooperage, and that was then used for a launch video that the advertising agency did, and it was used in a commercial, and all of the other communication in the marketing mix was all inspired by the stories told through design codes. So it's not just taking a picture of a bottle and sticking it on a display or in an ad. It's about the codes, and it gives you a very deep, rich, and meaningful story that's very authentic, and it's uniquely Cooper's. So we're just a few minutes over. I know that we do have time for questions if anyone wants to stick around and ask anything.
Yes, thank you, Don. And as Don mentioned, we'll open it up for questions now, so please submit your questions into the control panel. Given that the Cooperage is unique, is there not a risk of creating a generic bourbon brand by also using codes that are common to the industry?
I would say no, and here's why. The thing is that it's not about copying one code, and it's not about using a code. It's not about something as simple as saying we want to make it look like a barrel, because I think that would defeat the purpose, and it would do exactly what you're saying. What we're looking at is a whole palette of codes. We decode them, we look for that meaning, and then we recode them in a really unique way. So if you look at the final design, there's blue, which is in this category, and that's kind of also a point. You know, we did a thorough competitive context to understand where the white space was. Blue is a very unique color. It's also something that is uniquely that Cooperage. It's the denim from the Coopers themselves. We created an emblem that was it's in the background of the label. It's the hypothetical union that we would have created if the Coopers had a union. They are, of course, in a union. But there's the way that we developed and used those codes. We're not just copying things, we're using them as inspiration and layering them together to make a really deep and rich story. Hopefully that answers your question.
Another question coming in is, how do you take into account competitive context?
So the competitive context is critical, especially in this category, because there's so many bourbons out there, and everybody's trying to out-authentic everybody else, because bourbon is so much about the storytelling and the authenticity. And there's a lot of bourbons out there that tell kind of trite stories, trying to be really authentic. So we definitely went and looked on-premise and off-premise. We wanted to see what other stories we could find from other bourbon brands that are in this, that were going to be competitors to this. And I should say that the intention was that this would be between $40 and $50 a bottle, so it's a pretty high-end bourbon. So we were looking at that competitive context. We also looked at the ultra premium, and we also looked at the entry level bourbon brands. So we wanted to develop a design and an identity for this brand that was steeped in their authentic heritage in a way that was telling the story different from the way other people were telling the story. And no one else was telling the story of the Cooperage. And they have permission, Brown-Forman has permission to own the story of the Cooperage because they are the only ones that have their own Cooperage. And they will be and are the first to market in telling that story. So there's also things like the silhouette of the bottle, how it performs in the back bar, how it performs off-premise in a liquor store. Brand colors. You know, we are creating a brand that is going to be a foundational big brand. So we also noticed there are not very many brands in the bourbon category that utilize color. There's lots of browns, there's lots of blacks, there's a lot of the same look, tone, feel. And so we mapped all of those and said, here is white space over here. So that was also one of the things that we did as we were starting to consider where this design might go.
Okay, another question is, this is a great in-depth process. How sophisticated was the client?
The client was, I'm going to answer this. I'm going to answer this, but then also comment. The client was sophisticated. They understood archetypes. They understood design codes. We brought them kind of along in our way of doing things, but we didn't have a big hill to climb to teach them as we went through this process. Now, that being said, the same process for all of our clients. And the idea of decoding and recoding is actually not a concept that is new to design. But the process that we go through is more thoughtful and it's more deliberate. And rather than using design codes as inspiration and hoping that they kind of combine into something that works, taking a more thoughtful approach, and we refer to ourselves as architects and designers of meaningful brands. That's where the architect part of this comes in. And we scaled this process, and obviously this is a very robust, big project with a big client, a big company, and a big brand. We use a similar process, although modified and scaled, for much smaller clients. And of course, it also is well suited to a status brand like this, but we do it with all kinds of brands. We do it with organizations. We do it with food brands. We do it with convenience brands. We use it with retailers. So it's beautifully flexible because it's about the thinking that goes into it. It's not about a rigid process. It's about a framework and a philosophy and an approach to solving problems that's based on, think back to that iceberg. It's about figuring out first what you want to communicate, that feeling, and then laddering up to the subconscious and conscious. So it looks like a very big, heavy, robust process. It isn't, A. B, we also are very flexible and agile, and we sometimes customize the process to the client's needs.
Great. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. Thank you again, Don, for this very insightful presentation, and thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, we'll be receiving an email with a link to the video recording of this webinar. And be sure to visit brandsquare.com to register for next month's webinar with Paul Haggett, Business Development Manager of Shock Australia, as he covers country of origin labeling legislation and compliance in Australia. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everybody.